Hello all, I'm Deepthi Warrior here with a comprehensive video on integrated pest management for you all. Now, before we get into the concept of integrated pest management or IPM as it is popularly called, here's a small reminder for you. If you find this video useful, do share it with your friends and hit the like button. The concept of integrated pest management is quite popular in agriculture today, and we'll be dealing with this topic under these 5 headings. We'll first look at how this concept came about to be developed, and then we'll look at the differences between IPM and IDM, and I'll also tell you a few key changes that you can do in your terminologies to write the answer for IPM as well as IDM. Both are slightly different from each other. We look at the importance of this agricultural system. We look at what are the major principles and what are the current tools and techniques that are being employed for integrated pest management. Now, when we see the timeline of development of this entire concept, initially it was the descriptive phase, this one. So the descriptive phase was the time when agriculturalists and scientists became aware of the plant diseases. They became aware of the different pests that were harming the plants. They started noting down and observing the various causes that were happening, that were behind this damage to their crops. They started publishing a lot of reports, articles about the pathogens morphology, about the location where it is going and affecting the plant, about the biology of the organism. If it's a microorganism or a pathogen which causes a disease, they started tabulating what is the shape of its spores, how it is spreading in the environment, what kind of chemical control may be helpful. This is all what was done during the descriptive phase, when they were still writing and observing things about the pathogen or even about the pest. This swiftly moved into the experimental phase. So the experimental phase was when they realized the importance of plant diseases and pests in an agricultural system, and the scientists began a lot of experiments to find out answers. What answers were they looking for? How these pests or pathogens are entering the plant, how do they multiply, which part are they entering through, how do they spread within the plant, do they cause a systemic infection. And a lot of experiments were also done, not just about the pathogenicity but also to find the control of these diseases and control the pests, so that losses can be avoided or at least reduced because of these organisms. And finally, we had the etiological phase, that is where the causes of the specific plant diseases were proved. So the scientists were more focused on proving how a particular pathogen was causing a disease, or in case of pest, how a particular pest was entering inside. A lot of advanced technology had come in by this time. So with the use of electron microscope, PCR, density gradient centrifugation, and many other techniques, they even tried to visualize what was happening within the plant. They tried to grow the fastidious pathogens in case of microorganisms, and they were able to sort of tell what exactly is happening inside the plant and what is happening to the plant. Now, this all of these are done. All that research, all of those studies, those observations are being done to control those diseases, to control those pests, because at the end of the day, we don't want our crop to be harmed by pests and the yield to go down. So the control strategies started way back, like by I think late 1600s itself. They started using a lot of chemicals. One example of that is the mixture of copper sulfate and lime, which is called as the Bordeaux mixture, which is used for mildews. Or people started using organic mercury compounds, they started using antibiotics, systemic fungicides. Many different types of chemical pesticides were used to control. So by the time it was 1950s, a lot of chemical pesticides were already in the fields, were already in nature, because people were desperately trying to control the pathogens as well as the pests. But we do know what's the concern with chemical pesticides or using chemicals in general. The use of chemical pesticides started slowly getting phased out. Slowly a lot of bans started on the chemical pesticides because they were containing mercury, and they were it caused a lot of problems in many other arenas. We already have spoken about this in several videos. So the concern over chemical pesticides was so high, and naturalists and scientists and agriculturalists actually came up with other ways in which they can control the pathogens, in other ways in which they can control the pests. These included cultural practices. These are all the alternative control mechanisms or strategies that they came up with, like, changing the cultural practices, improving the cultural practices, like removing the plant debris or using a seed which is free of the pathogen. So they started using different practices for growing the crops that could actually reduce the incidence of that pest or the incidence of that disease. Then they also looked into the biological control. This of course came much later. I think it was in the 1960s that they started trying out biological control using microorganisms to control other microorganisms, or using microorganisms to control an insect. So they did start biological practices. And then finally, a more recent mechanism is the systemic acquired resistance, where you use pathogenic microorganisms or even chemicals in some cases to cause small necrotic lesions in the plant. So you willfully or wantedly harm the plant. Why are you doing it? But you don't do it on a large scale. You do it on a really tiny scale. Why are you doing it? So that you can activate the defense of the plant against subsequent infections. It's very similar to how human beings get resistance to a particular disease through vaccination. So when we take up a vaccine, we are actually introducing a particular pathogen into our body in the hope that in future, when that pathogen does affect me, I already would have antibodies inside which are going to protect me. Same concept works over here. So this is again much more recent in case of plants. These are the different practices that were being utilized as alternatives to avoid or reduce at least the usage of chemical pesticides. And together, clubbing all of these together is what makes the final integrated pest management. So integrated pest management is actually a whole strategy. It's a method by which you can control the pests. You use integrated techniques. You don't just depend on chemical pesticides. You use a host of techniques. We'll learn more about that. But you use different techniques so that you can control the pests. And this concept actually came up in the 1960s and 1970s. It is mainly a holistic, that is a fully rounded or whole approach. It's a sustainable approach, and it is used in agriculture to control the plant diseases, to control the plant pests effectively, at the same time minimizing any kind of adverse environmental impacts. So you do want to control the plant diseases and the pests, but you do not want to harm the environment by use of chemicals, for example. So you are trying to minimize the environmental impact, and at the same time you're ensuring that there's long-term productivity. These terms together is what sums up the meaning of integrated pest management. Now, integrated disease management is like a subset. So integrated pest management, integrated disease management, all of these together are now being used under an umbrella term called as plant health management. All of these are mainly aiming to ensure that the plant health is good. That's all. So if you are only looking at IPM, you are focusing on how to avoid pests. If you're looking at integrated disease management, you're going more focused. You're not bothered about pests. You're bothered about pathogens, about microorganisms which cause diseases. So all of these are basically looking at these aims itself. These are the objectives. Objectives for both remain the same. Wherever, if you are answering the question for integrated pest management, use the word pest, controlling pests. If you are writing about integrated disease management, use the term controlling plant diseases. That's all. Small changes and you get your answer. So IPM or IDM is basically made up of multiple strategies. You have, there is a cultural strategy, chemical strategy, biological strategy. You are mixing up everything and you're ensuring that you manage the pest. Now, let me tell you one more thing. There's a big difference between pest control and pest management. When it's pest control, it's more like a reactive approach. The pest has already come and affected your plant, and now you're trying to control it. That's pest control. But pest management is more like a proactive approach, something like a preventive approach. You do a lot of things to ensure that you prevent pests in the first place. Of course, after that, if they do infest your plants, then yes, you have to go for other techniques as well. But management is where you try to avoid in the first place, and then if it does happen, then you manage with it, you deal with it. Now, IPM or IDM, both of these are trying to, optimize the pest control or the pathogen control. Pathogen is a word you will use when you're writing about IDM or integrated disease management, and Pest is a word that you'll use when you're writing about pest management. So it's the optimization of pest or pathogen control in not just an environmentally sound manner, but also in an economically sound manner. You can't have too much of money being put in to avoid using chemical pesticides, and then at the end of the day, your yield is very less. No farmer is going to take it up. So you need to have it in an economically as well as ecologically sound manner, and that is why you need to have multiple techniques in place. It's very, very crucial in modern agricultural practice actually to ensure that you minimize the chemical inputs and you promote such kind of sustainable practices so that your effect is long lasting and it is more permanent. So what we look at now is we'll see what is the importance of IPM or IDM, that's integrated disease management. The first importance is sustainability, sustainable agriculture. Sustainability and sustainable is a buzzword now. It's a keyword that's been going around in all the major circles from some years now. So sustainable agriculture is promoted by IPM. Sustainability is a practice wherein you use whatever you need to use, at the same time you leave enough resources for the future generations. That is what sustainability is all about. So IPM and IDM actually promote sustainable agriculture, and it helps preserve natural resources, biodiversity is maintained, everything. It's an overall health of the environment is being taken care. It definitely ensures that there is reduced chemical use. So because you are integrating other practices also, yeah, you may need to use chemicals, but not as much as if it were only chemical pesticides. So you're definitely reducing the chemical usage. Thus, you are minimizing the residue of the chemical in water, soil, in the environment. So it's actually benefiting the human health as well as the environment, the ecosystem. Economic viability, like I said, your aim is to optimize strategies in such a way that the economic viability of the farmer is being enhanced. You need to ensure that he is able to improve the crop yield, improve the quality of the crop, at the same time reduce the cost of controlling the diseases. He can't put in kilograms and kilograms of chemicals and get a crop, because it's not going to help him economically either. So you need to have economic viability, which is being provided by IPM. Reduced in environmental impact, we've already spoken about it, how the environment is definitely being benefited because you are not killing the beneficial organisms in the soil unnecessarily. And finally, it is helping us to develop a very robust system. Robust is robust agricultural system because it's very resilient. What does robust or resilient mean? It means that the crops, the agricultural system is quite resistant to disease outbreaks. It's more effective. They are more healthy. The vigor of the plants is very good. They are able to resist pests. They are able to resist disease outbreaks. And that is the kind of system that we are developing. So this slide, whatever is shown is, the importance of IPM. You could also include it under advantages or benefits of IPM. Now, there are a few principles in integrated pest management. So these principles are, the first part is to accurately identify the pests and also identify which are the beneficial organisms. See, all the organisms that are present in our surroundings are not pests. You need to first identify which is a pest, which is a beneficial organism. Even if it is a pest, do you need to kill it? Do you need to control it? Is it required? Because some organisms may not affect your plant at all, may not affect your crop. So you need to ensure that you identify. You have to use a lot of appropriate strategies to identify first whether the organism that you have in your field is a pest or not. We should never go for a pest control program until we are sure whether that organism is a pest or not, whether you really need to control it or not. There are a lot of different types of pests, like there could be small insect like organisms, there may be microbes that are there could be a lot of weeds which are present. So based on each type, again, the approach that will come in our IPM would be differ. So you have to first identify the pests accurately, and like I said, most organisms are not pests. Then we need to have a threshold level. So we have to ensure that we set a threshold level. We ensure that a particular, only if a particular threshold level is being crossed. Threshold level is like a standard. Only if that standard level is being crossed, only then we need to go for a control measure. Till then, we should not go on a killing spree of the pests. We are upsetting the ecological balance. We should keep that in mind. So we have to determine our pest control goals, and then using the threshold levels, you do need to do a regular monitoring. So regular monitoring of crops is required to know whether the pest is present, whether that particular disease is there or not. And if it is there, you have to identify that problem early and start the, whatever management techniques you have early. Only then you will be able to manage it timely. So identification of pests, setting the threshold level where intervention is required, means at beyond what level should I actually step in and start the control measures, and then regular monitoring of the field to ensure that if the pest comes in, or in case of IDM, if the disease sets in, you catch it early so that you can control early. Now, there are three major principles that are involved. The first one is exclusion. So you always try to avoid the conflict. You always try to, exclude that particular pest or pathogen from the field. Prevention is the first strategy that you have. You need to keep a pest from becoming a problem. It should not enter your field at all. So you have to ensure that there are preventive measures, like, using, we have many other measures that we'll talk about in detail, like using a disease resistant crop, or using crop rotation, using proper sanitation. What are you trying to do over there? You are trying to keep the pest away. You don't want the pest to come at all. Only if it comes, it's a problem, right? Now, what you are looking for is, you don't want the pest to come at all. So the first job is to avoid the pests. Avoidance or prevention is, the first part of our job. That's exclusion. Exclusion also means preventing the introduction of inoculum. We'll talk more about this in, the strategies. So you avoid the inoculum from coming in. That's also an example. You avoid the pests from getting anywhere near your crops. That is also the meaning of exclusion. The second part is suppression. What you're trying to do over here is, you're trying to reduce the pest numbers. So the first one is avoid them completely. Suppression is, you're trying to reduce the pest numbers, or whatever damage is being caused by the pathogen. I'm repeating again over here. If you're talking about IPM, you mention the term pest. If you're talking about IDM, you mention the term pathogen. So you are trying to reduce the pest or the pathogen levels to an acceptable level. Okay, till this level it is fine. This is still in my threshold limit. So this is the acceptable level. You are trying to resist it. Once you detect the presence of a pest and you know that the control is necessary, usually people will go for suppression or exclusion. Eradication is the last option. So eradication is when, you have to destroy the entire pest population. This is complete destruction. That's eradication. So you can't do it just by reducing their numbers. You need to kill each and every one of them. That's called as destruction. Destruction is not actually viable, or it's not very easy in outdoor areas, because the place is huge, the field would be very vast, and it's difficult to control a lot of factors. You can't, control air that's coming in. You can't control animals that move around, or insects that come that easily in an outdoor setup. So eradication is usually not an option in outdoors. However, if it's an indoor setup like a greenhouse, or if you have a small lab where you have put it up, in indoor setup, yes. In more enclosed environments, destruction or eradication is definitely an option. So the most common options you look for in when you are setting up an integrated pest management program would be exclusion and suppression. Now let's see what are the different tools or techniques. I have put up three tools over here. The first one is the cultural technique. Second one would be mechanical, and the third one would be physical. You can even club mechanical and physical together and write write all the options there together. Right. So the cultural practice is where, the way you grow the crops. This includes crop rotation. It includes the proper spacing of all the plants. It includes the destruction, complete burning of all the refuse, the soil tillage, varying the time in which you are harvesting, varying the time of planting the different crops, and, water management, using the fertilizers judicially, everything that is involved in growing the crop. That is what you call as the cultural practices. So, we need to look for, deep plowing. For one example, if you are having deep plowing would ensure that any kind of propagules or any insect eggs or larvae, if they are there in the soil, it will all be brought out, and due to the high temperatures and, during the churning, during the plowing, you would be killing them. So that's an example of, sanitizing the soil. So in this way, crop rotation, soil tillage, all of these practices are helping in removing and disposing of any kind of pest or pathogen that may be present in the soil and which can be avoided altogether when you are growing the crop. So other good practices include even weed removal, weed control, controlling the weed. Again, that is one important cultural practice, or cutting and pruning of the plants, proper spacing. All of these are examples of cultural practices. The second part is mechanical practice, where we have destruction by hand or using traps or using row covers, using barriers, ensuring that, or mulching is where you are putting the plant waste or the plant debris is being put between the crops. So you have different methods by which you are actually trying to raise a barrier. You're trying to block the pests from coming near your plant. You're trying to avoid it from spreading from one plant to the other. So mechanical methods are again excluding with the help of barriers or traps or destruction by hand. Physical control is where we generally use, vary the temperature. So heat is the most common one, like hot water treatment of seeds can be done, so to avoid that seed-borne diseases. So you treat the seeds with hot water and then immerse them in hot water for a long period of time before you actually use them. Or even empty godowns are superheated to ensure that there are no pests or any kind of pathogens that are hibernating in the stored grain. Heat is a good option. Or refrigeration, when you use very low temperature treatment, this is again very common for controlling post harvest diseases in godowns. So refrigeration is an option. Or controlled atmosphere storage, that is again something that is being utilized. Manipulation of moisture, you control the moisture, reduce the moisture in a storage area so that pests don't attack the stored grain. So these are all the physical methods in which you can control the pests or even the pathogens from coming anywhere near your produce or your plants. The fourth one is biological or even genetic control. Now, biological control is where you encourage the natural predators. So there are a lot of natural predators and parasites and organisms which affect pests. You encourage them. You allow them to grow because you know that if they are living over there, they will take care of your pests. In case natural predators are not present, you introduce predators into that soil, or you introduction of, or artificially you increase the number of parasitoids, predators, like, or egg or larvae or pupa of organisms which are going to eat your pest. That is also a good way of controlling. So what you're trying to do over there is ensuring that the predatory nematodes actually attack your harmful pests or harmful nematodes in the soil and they take care of them. There are also a lot of biocontrol agents that are used. They're also called as biopesticides. So biopesticides includes microorganisms, like we have Bacillus subtilis, that is one organism that can be used, or we have organisms like Pseudomonas fluorescens that can be used. All of these are basically bacteria which are helping in attacking a particular pest, or ensuring that they are killing the pest. So these are again examples of biopesticides or biocontrol agents. You can even introduce non-pathogenic strains of a disease-causing microorganism, like you're creating competition for the resources. So it becomes very harmful, very difficult for the harmful strain of organism to establish because now they are competing with the strain that you have introduced. So competition is one way in which you can control biologically. Using plant varieties which are resistant. This is very important. This is a genetic mechanism. You use resistant varieties. This is a very, very popular mechanism as well. You develop a variety by breeding, you develop a cultivar that is actually resistant to the pest or resistant to a particular pathogen. It makes your job easy. You don't have to worry about most other things because now whatever happens, that pathogen cannot affect your plant. There's also a technique called as the sterile male technique. So, using a sterile male of a pest actually helps because when this sterile male mates with a female insect, the there will be no eggs, there will be no progeny at all, so there will be no larva. And when there is no larva, over a period of time the population of this pest will be completely nullified, they'll be completely removed or eliminated. So this is also a very popular technique that is used for controlling using a genetic factor over there. So biological or genetic control is where we try to use natural predators, natural pest controlling organisms or mechanisms we use sterile male technique, and we can also go for resistant varieties. The fifth one is having a regulatory control. Now, regulatory control is actually plant quarantine. So, preventing the introduction, preventing the spread of exotic pathogens. Exotic pathogens, as in organisms which are new to a particular region, which are never found in that region. They are completely foreign. You avoid them from getting in because you never know. They can become a weed, they can create a problem for you, they can become a pest later. So, you prevent the introduction of exotic pathogens by putting them in quarantine. So, quarantine and regulatory measures are definitely in place in many countries, and this, let me tell you, is an example of exclusion. So you're trying to avoid the pathogen or the pest in the first place itself. And the last measure, as a last resort, when you are unable to control with anything else, we need to go for chemical pesticides, chemical insecticides, attractants, repellents. You need to use chemicals, but then the thing here is you have to use them judiciously. You need to decide how much to use, when to use, do I really need to use. All of that is being decided by use of the chemical pesticide. So you can either treat the seeds, or you can spray it in the field. Any one way can be utilized. So the integrated pest management is basically a comprehensive approach, multi-dimensional approach, which is ensuring that the environment is also safe. We are using environmental friendly practices, and we are ensuring that the crop diversification is there, so that risk of disease outbreaks, risk of pests coming in is very low. What we should know here are what control tactics are available, what we can use. We need to evaluate the benefits, evaluate the risks of each tactic, and make the perfect combination for us to have a wholesome, holistic, integrated pest management. I hope this video was useful to all of you, and I hope to see you all in the next one as well. Bye.